Hey, Facebook, good evening here on Saturday, right? A couple days before Lobby Day. And I know that a lot of you have talked about um, what you think the Constitution says and what you think the Constitution is about regarding the Second Amendment. But I wanted to spend a couple of minutes with you. I'm going to try to make this less than 10 on what the actual Constitution, the main case on the Second Amendment really says. Now, this is the United States Supreme Court case of uh, DC versus Heller. And this case was decided in June of 2008, and Justice Scalia has written the opinion for the court. Now, before I jump into this case, what I want to do is explain to you why the VCDL lost their injunction case in Richmond this week. Now, at the end of the opinion, which is right here, the court says, additionally, the foregoing case law demonstrates that because individuals have limited rights to bear arms, the plaintiff in this case will not suffer irreparable harm sufficient to justify the injunction. And many of you have taken issue with that phrase, limited rights. And so I wanted to explain to you why the judge said that. Now, I will also say this. You have made many incorrect assumptions about Judge Taylor, that this is an Obama appointee and all of that stuff. This is a Richmond City State Court judge. President Obama had nothing to do with this person becoming a judge. This is a judge from the circuit court. Now, you have to understand also that judges have to follow the law. Regardless of if they agree with it, they have to follow the law. And so when we look at what this judge is talking about in this opinion, what she's really talking about comes right here in the opinion where she's talking about the Heller case. Okay, so this is right here, Heller versus District of Columbia, and this judge is bound by the decision of the Heller case. So let's dive into Heller. Now, I know many of you are not legally trained, and many of you think you are an expert on the Constitution, despite the fact that you've had no time in law school. But essentially, when the Supreme Court rules on something, every court, every state court, every jurisdiction in the United States has to follow what the Supreme Court says. Now, what this case basically dealt with is an opinion from the Supreme Court that decided whether the DC rules about whether people could own firearms for self-defense was legal. Now, believe it or not, until this case came down in 2008, there was not clear definitive ruling by the United States Supreme Court on whether or not we could own firearms for defensive purposes. Now, without going through the extremely difficult read of the first couple of sections here, I will conclusively tell you that the Justice Scalia broke down the meaning of the words and the meaning of the phrases, and they went through the Federalist Papers, and they looked at Alexander Hamilton, and they looked at all of the other founding fathers, and they clearly came up with the definition that we were allowed to own firearms for self-defense. Now, it was not until this case in 2008 that was truly resolved. And you can look at the prefatory clause and the operative clause, and they're still dealing with this because in this case, the other side argued that you can't have firearms in the context of self-defense. It would only be for the militia. This was being argued just 12 years ago. So this is a 200-year-old amendment, and this was still being argued at 12 years ago. What the heck did the founding fathers mean? All right, so he breaks it down and he goes through this first section and all of this and goes through that. Now I'm skipping through all of this because I've already given you the answer, and it's very difficult, and it's very difficult to read even as a lawyer everything that he's saying. But I want to get this is kind of cool. He goes into the post-Civil War legislation. I mean, it's an interesting read for sure, especially if you're a law student or a lawyer, of how we get to where we are. But really, this is the problem with the Heller decision, and it starts right here. Like most rights, the rights secured by the Second Amendment are not unlimited. So for all of you that say no infringement, no, every law is an unconstitutional law, you're flat out just wrong. The only court in the United States that has the authority to define what the Constitution meant was the United States Supreme Court. And this is the rule that they've put in here. The Second Amendment is not unlimited. So the fact that it says shall not be infringed, that does not mean that gun laws in any context are illegal or unconstitutional. Justice Scalia further writes here that, especially even right here, he says, although we do not undertake an exhaustive historical analysis today, nothing in our opinion should be taken to cast doubt on long-standing prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons, by the mentally ill, or laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools and government buildings, or laws imposing conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of arms. So basically, when a state makes a law that says, a felon can't have a firearm, or you can't have a firearm in a school, or you can't have a firearm in a government building, or you can't have a firearm on government grounds, the Supreme Court of the United States said right here in this phrase that this is allowable. So to say that the governor's order to bar firearms on government property is illegal just is not constitutionally accurate according to the Heller case. Now, where it gets even more wanky, and this is why we are really in the mess that we are in, is we talk about this paragraph right here. Now, this is the main problem that Heller causes, that deals with whether we're allowed to own firearms that might be more unusual. So he says, it may be objected that if weapons that are most useful in military service, M16 rifles and the like, may be banned, then the Second Amendment right is completely detached from the prefatory clause. But as we have said, the conception of the militia at the time of the Second Amendment's ratification was the body of citizens capable of military service who would bring the sorts of lawful weapons that they possessed at home to militia duty. It may be true today that a militia, to be effective, sorry, I've lost my place, as they were in the 18th century, would require sophisticated arms that are highly unusual in society at large. Indeed, it may be true that no amount of small arms could be usefully against modern-day bombers and tanks, but the fact that the modern developments have limited the degree of fit between the prefatory clause and the protected right cannot change our interpretation of the right. Okay. So what Scalia is basically saying here, I mean, this is the argument that we make, that we should be allowed to own AR-15s and other types of weapons, because if we were ever called up into lawful service, this part of this paragraph opinion says that we have the right to bring these weapons to the militia. So this is the strongest part of the paragraph of the entire opinion that gives us the authority to keep things like AR-15s. And so when you're reading this opinion, that part of the paragraph is very important. Now, the problem, though, is that Justice Scalia goes on to say that we are not allowed to own firearms that are unusual in nature. And so when you're talking about unusual weapons, he goes on to talk about tanks and things that would be unusual to the common side of things. And so why we're in this mess is when he made this paragraph right here, all right, this one right here, which I just read to you, he didn't really say what, not him, the court, the majority of the court didn't really say what limitations exist. And so what the courts have done since Heller is they have created exceptions to Heller called scrutiny tests. And what they are doing with the scrutiny test is they are coming up here and they're using this part of the opinion right here and saying that the states still have the right to restrict firearm use on their citizens. And that's what they're doing. And so then the state has done, these federal courts have created this balancing test that says, well, the Supreme Court says that there are, this is not an unlimited right. The states can impose some regulations and the federal government can impose regulations. And then it boils down and bottom lines out to, are we in a position of being able to regulate AR-15s? Are we in the position of being able to regulate high-capacity magazines? And they've created this scrutiny, and the scrutiny is if the state has the right to, if the state can show a compelling interest, and that doesn't overly affect the individual's ability to defend themselves, then that's where we are. So that is why we are in this mess, are the conflicts of these two main paragraphs. And so for those reasons, that is as quickly of an analysis as I can give you at 12 minutes now as to why Heller is the way it is. And I hope that brings some explanation here to you. You're not, you sitting there saying all gun laws are unconstitutional. That's just not factual. It's not true. The Supreme Court has definitively ruled on that. They're the only body that can tell you if something is factual or not. And I hope that brings some understanding that, yes, the government can impose certain rules. The question, though, is right now is can they say we can't own a certain type of weapon like an AR-15? And that is what the Warman versus Healy case is about. And so if the Supreme Court takes that case, you're going to see Heller kind of evolve and make that decision. I hope that helps. You don't have to say mean things on my Facebook page about what I've said here. I've just tried to break down exactly what the law is, and I hope that brings clarification. My name's Tim Anderson. Today is Saturday. I hope you guys are having a great day.